Got another question from her. She asked, Kelsey, women are turned on so much through their senses, especially what they hear. In my most recent struggles, I have been using audio porn to masturbate. It can seem less harmful than regular porn, but it's not. Suggestions or recommendations for overcoming this specific issue. And personally, I'm just glad you're here to talk about this, because from a guy's perspective, getting aroused through the ears doesn't even seem, what, really, huh? They might listen to music that has horribly degrading lyrics to women. They're not typically aroused by that. But I had read a book recently on the woman's brain, and the author is a female neurologist, and she explained that there's actually sounds that a woman's brain can hear and detect that are completely imperceptible to the male brain. Different nuances and inflections in the human voice that the man's brain is literally deaf to. I think there's entire paragraphs that we are deaf to, not just sounds, but I think there's so much more that a woman's brain is absorbing, and the way that it's connected to her body, her sensuality. This needs a feminine response. So audio porn, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to have to read that book. I was just telling my husband that a smell gave me a headache, and he did not believe me. I had to research this for him to show him that it was true. No, and that I actually think what she's speaking to speaks to how difficult this is for women in general, because, they say the female brain, the male brain, women aren't necessarily as visual. And so many women can be addicted to masturbation without an addiction to pornography. It's pretty crazy. Whereas usually that's not the case for men. One kind of coincides with the other. And so it's audio, it's visual, but it's also, books, written pornography for women is the number one version of pornography for women. I think, thank you, 50 Shades of Grey, for kind of opening that to not just, the romance novels in the back of the store, but the New York's bestseller type situation that women now think it's completely fine because it's allowed publicly. And so yeah, there's a lot of things. And so similar to what we're sharing here about connection and finding positive ways to not just remove what's harmful, but to actually add in things that are good, beautiful, and true. I think that's really important in what we're talking about here. When we're saying, okay, get away from pornography, remove yourself from all these bad visual or books and stuff, it doesn't mean now you just sit alone in a dark room, right? There are beautiful and good and true things that you can start filling your minds with. And so I had a friend that wasn't even addicted to pornography or masturbation, but she just really desired a relationship. She just desperately wanted to be dating someone, to be romantically pursued, and it was all consuming. It was kind of an obsessive, thought. And I started asking her, and she's like, I've stopped watching chick flicks. I've gotten those out of my mind. And what we realized was that she was listening to almost straight country music, all these romance songs that was still. And so even though she thought she was doing everything she could to cut it out, there was still this one piece. And so I would say not only removing the audio pornography, but any type of audio or sensory type content that could be triggering to all of these things. And so the over-sexualized songs, and it's not going to be easy. Many songs are about this. But there are good and beautiful songs. There are good and beautiful things to fill your life with, media and otherwise. And I would assume when I talk to anyone who's trying to rid pornography from their life, they first get rid of the X-rated content, right? The pornographic websites, they do that. But then they're still on the streaming devices, the primetime television, which for women, you see a couple aggressively making out and then closing a door, and our imaginations can fill in the dots, fill in the blank, whatever. And we can carry on that fantasy with just the female brain just does that. I joke around how I played Barbies until far too old. And it just our desire for imagination and storytelling, that's all a part of it. And so really learning that it might seem embarrassing at first, but remove all over-sexualized content from your life. And that's where you're going to start to see the biggest difference. So, yeah.
It's funny, as you're speaking, I remember a friend of mine used to be in the United States Marine Corps, and one day he was at the base, and he noticed there's just a ton of porn on the bookshelves for the troops to watch. And, one weekend they had a break from the base and guys could go do whatever. So a bunch of guys went from Camp Pendleton down to Tijuana to go clubbing, and he decided to hang back. And so he stayed there, and he went over to the bookshelf where all the porn was. Now, this was before it was live streaming or DVD or whatever, and they had the VHS cassettes of porn. So he was a bit of a technician. So he took a screwdriver, and he unscrewed the VHS cassettes and pulled out the pornographic footage, and then he put in there footage of other movies. He actually inserted the footage of VeggieTales. What he was doing with the VeggieTales VHS at the Marine base, I'm not certain, but he put that in there. He actually put in the contents of Jesus of Nazareth, which is a 6-hour movie. And then he put back all the pornographic casings, put it up on the bookshelf. So Saturday night, the boys roll home and they're like, hey, let's watch some porn. And they pop it in and they're like, why are there cucumbers dancing and singing? And so they took it out and then they put another one in. And it was the Jesus of Nazareth. Now, he hadn't rewound it all the way, so it was kind of halfway through. And they're like, oh, okay, this is a real movie. We haven't seen this one yet. And they're all sitting down, they're waiting, and they're like, well, maybe we just have to be patient. Maybe the porn has a plot, And they ended up watching the entire movie, and he got in big trouble for it. But you know what they said? The plot thing. I think for the guys, it's like, let's get through the plot to the action. Whereas I think so often for the woman, the plot is half of the action, the storyline, the deeper message, the adventure of being wanted and pursued and all this stuff. And, it's sometimes been said that, what arouses a guy is, one word, Playboy, with 50,000 pictures, whereas with the girl, it's one word, filthy shades of gray or Fabio with, not with one picture on the cover, but then 50,000 words inside. So it's maybe not the image that she's going after. It might be something else, that deeper storyline. So, I would pose the question to you, just straight up, like, are chick flicks emotional porn? What would you say?
In some regards, they're physical porn. It depends on the chick flick you're talking about. So yeah, I think there's a lot of case for that. There's certainly objectification. I remember I was watching, I couldn't even tell you the movie, normal chick movie. Guy comes out with his shirt off. All the girls just hoot and holler, just like, the theater uproars. I'm like, if that was a woman in a bathing suit and all the guys started making call out noise, we would be pissed. We would just be slapping the guys and just so upset and offended. And yet women have just allowed themselves in the world, like, we can get a pass. We're just allowed to objectify men, and that's completely okay. And it's appalling. I mean, seeing how many movies and shows just have the random shirt off scene for no reason. He has no reason to have his shirt off. It's just crazy. And I think, what you're speaking to, the plot and the story, and if women are sitting there like, no, that's not true. I mean, if you've ever had a crush on a male celebrity or think he's attractive, how many of you have Googled or researched maybe his favorite ice cream or where his hometown is? You kind of want a backstory. And it's fascinating. You talk to girls about this and they all kind of sheepishly like, oh shoot, yeah, like slowly I've collected information about this actor or whatever. And you don't know them. You've completely emotionally, emotional integrity. Sarah Swafford goes through this. You've built up a false relationship in your brain, and chick flicks very much lend themselves to that. I'm not one of those people that thinks you need to remove chick flicks from your life to be pure or to seek freedom. I think there are healthy ways, and depending on the movie, there are decent movies that have, deep, good, meaningful messages of family and connection and pursual. A man pursuing a woman is actually something desirable and that we as man and woman should be seeking and looking for. But it's the ones that sneak in. I always throw out The Notebook. It's kind of getting dated now, but you look at The Notebook, and one, there's a very sexually graphic scene that anyone who's seen it can recall. But you also look at a storyline where there's a woman who's engaged to another man who then has sex with someone else. And yet we desire and root for that affair. We want that couple because that's the couple the whole love story is about. And you sit there and you think about what the actual plot is and the relationship you're rooting for. And that at the end of the movie, the guy has Alzheimer's, so you're crying. You're like, this is so beautiful, the love. And you sit back and go, that love was founded on a cheating affair that has no place in real love. And so if you really break down the content that the world is selling us, it is manipulating us to be falling for these false ideas. Don't even get me started on the whole the bad boy mentality who then turns good for the woman. It's sickening because it's teaching and training women to desire qualities that are not attractive and not desirable long term. And so I would say pornography, yes, but in any case, it's it's harmful, depending on the chick flick, depending on the content that the woman's consuming, and depending on her struggle. Some chick flicks for some women can be very triggering in these addictions, and they should be removed. So I think it really, it depends on which one and what your struggle is specifically. But yeah, it's crazy.
I appreciate you saying that about the redeeming the bad boy kind of thing, because in 20 years of traveling and speaking, all these girls come up and, they're doing the missionary dating thing of, he's got issues and, I know he's made some mistakes and he's on parole and whatever, but, I'm going to change him. And, someone always does change in those relationships, but it's not the guy for the better. It's always the girl for the worse. And so I think when women get wrapped up in these plots, they almost try to hope to live them out in a sense. And I think that the woman's desire, as you're saying, for the celebrity, the background information, the details, all this stuff, that's a good thing. I mean, that's part of the feminine genius of the integration of woman. Like, she just doesn't want bodies. She wants a person. She wants the emotions, the story, to know the human being, and all of that is good. And so I think what the devil's going to want to do is just get in there and use the woman's strengths against her in a certain sense, where now she's emotionally stalking some guy on social media, whether he's a celebrity or a guy down the hall in the dorm, just emotionally. It's not just about physically getting too far. Emotionally, we get ahead of ourselves as well, I think. So a third question. Yeah, go on ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, and I think the pornography industry has discovered this. And that's why, maybe 20 years ago, pornographic material wasn't as enticing for women, and they are now just pumping out material that is much more attractive to women. I think Netflix had another film, 365 Days, and it's a story about a man who kidnaps a woman and basically gives her a year to fall in love with him, and during this year sexually abuses her essentially, but forces himself on her. And I'm fairly confident the whole desire of this movie is, do you want them together? But you realize what he does in this movie. Again, so they're getting really good at learning how to specifically target women and what women are desiring and wanting to like you said, recreate in their own life.
No, I was reading a book recently in terms of helping guys break free from porn, and the author mentioned how the porn industry is creating more violent pornography against women, because there's a demand for that. There's guys that are not just seeking to find intimacy in porn, they're seeking vengeance, they're seeking control, they're seeking domination of women, and porn gives them a sense of that, just like it gives them a sense of being desired. Oh, she wants me. She doesn't know who you are. She does not want you. They're paid to make themselves look like they want you. But, the porn industries are going after our weaknesses, and some women even desire to be hurt, desire to be controlled, desire to be dominated, submitted, used, because there's a wound there, and they're living out of the wound, and the porn industry is sexualizing their brokenness. And so they're going back to this because it's who they think they are. I am the damaged goods. I am the used. I am the one, that needs to be controlled. And it's infecting the wounds, what's going on here. But I think if we can understand the ache, where's this coming from? Where's the root? Where is the wellspring of this desire coming out? There's some very legitimate unmet need, or some very real wound that is gaping open wide. And that's kind of a portal of entry for so much of this stuff, our own brokenness, our own woundedness. And that's why the human intimacy, the accountability can just humanize us again, of just wait a minute, I'm more than my brokenness. Yeah, I'm messed up. Yeah, I've got this messed up fetish or this fantasy or this addiction or this or that, but I'm not those things. I'm a lot more than that. I'm a daughter of the King of Heaven. I'm a son of God. That's who I am at my core. I'm not the sexually abused girl who's now in college who never dealt with it. I'm not the porn addict who's been in the hiding but leading the youth group for 5 years. I'm more than these labels. I'm more than my brokenness. And until a person can realize their identity in Christ, a lot of times they identify, I think, with their woundedness and brokenness.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the extremes of these things, people who are out there and you're still talking about, I think it's 80% of pornography has violence in it, and 98% of that violence is directed towards the women. And people will hear that and they'll be appalled. But then you'll talk to another woman who's like, yeah, that's the kind I've gravitated towards after, a porn addiction just increased to the point where then normal stuff wasn't getting me there. So I started using this more violent pornography. And then now it's to the point, and she's in a relationship where she can't, experience pleasure, and she's married, unless there's violence. I mean, this is distortion. And when you hear it in the extreme, you're thinking, well, that's crazy. At least what I'm doing is okay, but that's crazy. But people don't see that they're very closely linked. And I think rape culture, when people are like, oh, pornography's fine, but rape, that's bad. Well, pornography has rape in the pornography, where these men and women become addicted to this fantasy, and then it needs to be played out in their own life. And it's appalling. And this woundedness that you're speaking to, that's exactly what we need to be seeking to fulfill, that none of this has a place in our life.
And I think at the deepest core, there's something so good there that's being desired. I mean, you look at Paul's language in the book of Ephesians, where, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit to your husbands. And people are, oh, that's sexist, biblical, whatever. Paul doesn't really mean that, or Paul's a sexist or whatever. But, maybe there's a divine design here. Not of a woman submitting because she's inferior, but I remember as Christopher West talking about the Latin, to submissio means to be under the mission of the husband. What is the mission of the husband is the cross, to give himself for love of his bride that she might be holy. Well, that's a mission I think a woman would agree to be underneath, by his side. And Paul talks about mutual submission as well, but there's a healthy submission that we're created for, not to be lorded over and dominated and controlled, but to be served with the love of Christ. And I think at the very core, that's what we're going after, but the devil's kind of pornified this holy urge within us. And so I think before we write off all our urges as just straight from the pit of hell, I think there's a good, that the Patreon person asking the question, was tapping into, that there's a good there, not just a physical good, but there's an emotional good, there's a spiritual good, there's something I'm pursuing. So it's not all evil. There's some good that needs to be redeemed in the midst of it. We just got to kind of dig through the rubble to find out what our hearts really ache for.
Amen.